Greetings, Wilkinson here. Today my guest is Helene Verin. Where do I know Helene from? Well, I crashed her after party at a movie premiere last weekend, and she was kind enough to let me come to her house. So that's another story. We won't get into that. But anyway, I was at her house and I thought, wow, this lady is super interesting. So I have to get her on my podcast. She's agreed, and here she is. Say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Glad to have you. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you so much, Wilkinson.
We started to talk for a few minutes in the living room, which I normally do with somebody before we do the podcast. And we were into it like 4 minutes, and I thought, nah, we're good. She's got stories. So let's retrace where we were. So you grew up where, and then your schooling, and tell a little about that, because that's a great story.
I grew up in a suburb of Chicago and never really liked authority or school, never went that much. To my parents' chagrin, left home at 16. And when I got back to Chicago, I lived in Europe, I lived in all over the world. And my parents said to me when I got back, well, you're going to have to go get a degree or something. And so in those days, which was the 70s, I had been enrolled for about a week at the University of Wisconsin at Madison in the art program. And so I went to see my dean of art, and I said, out of classroom experience is sometimes as valuable or more so than in classroom experience. And I had slides from everything in Europe where I had kind of led a tour of artists and archaeologists throughout Celtic Europe and ending at the Edinburgh Festival of Art. And so I
You were
was
how old?
19.
19, okay.
And, all these very well-known artists at the time were on it. And I was so young at the time. So anyway, the dean said, I've always thought someone would walk in and ask for a degree, and here you are. He said, I don't have a problem with it, but you got to get this credit and that credit and this credit. So I went around the campus the whole day. And at the end of the day, I went back to my dean and I said, everybody gave me credit except for art history. That's the one 3 credits that he wouldn't give me. And he says, I'll just give it to you anyway. And it was so funny at that time because Madison actually didn't have a BFA. They had a BS in art, which is basically what I got.
And you said that was appropriate because you BS'd your way into it.
Totally.
I've never heard a story like that. I can't believe he just gave you a degree.
Yeah. Well, it was the time. I don't think it would happen again. It was the 70s.
And you did that in a day.
Yeah. I went, yeah.
Well, that has to be
and
the
I
shortest,
didn't pay any money. My parents didn't pay any money.
the cheapest and shortest college career.
Yeah, but I probably have more education than the people that were there for 4 years.
Well, you had real stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're in Wisconsin. Did you stay there?
No, after I lived in Europe when I was college age, I came back and I moved to New York and worked for, at that time, Dennis Oppenheim, who's a well-known earth artist who's passed away. And my friends actually in Europe got me the job with Dennis. And so I moved in with him. I was very young, again, moved into his Soho place at 54 Franklin Street and became his assistant. And then okay, so that was how, I've always been in the art world. So let me think about this. I think I never went back then. I stayed in New York for the rest of the time until I moved to Palm Springs right during COVID on Mother's Day 2020.
So let's talk about your New York experience, because I'm sure you have stories.
Well, I was friends with Andy Warhol. He did my portrait, so I would hang out at Studio 54. And I was just talking to one of my girlfriends back in New York yesterday, and we were talking about how we were selling shoes at Bendel's, Henry Bendel's on 57th Street, because I wanted to be a shoe designer. And Jerry Miller, a famous shoe dog, as they call him, said to me, I got to learn about fit. So I was like selling shoes on 57th Street. Like my clientele was Yoko Ono, Jackie Kennedy. It was kind of crazy in those days. But anyway, so we would go to Studio 54 at like about 11 or 12 midnight. And then we would dance the night away, and then we would show up at work and then go home and sleep from 6 o'clock to like 12 o'clock.
Oh, brother.
So that was really fun.
So you went from
Studio
dancing
days.
Straight into work?
Yeah.
Did you change clothes, or were you dressed that would work either way?
Yeah.
Or didn't you care?
Yeah. I think we would take little dresser. We would go, there was a group of us, so we would always, have stuff at the other person's house, whoever was nearby,
Right. So do you have any crazy Studio 54 stories?
Well, I mean, like New Year's Eve was always great with what's her name, coming down from the ceiling, singing Last Dance. It was just, I mean, it was such great times. And I still have from those days, like VIP drink tickets. And actually, the funniest thing is that Steve Rubell was my gynecologist's brother, Don Rubell. So, and he's a big, Mira and Don Rubell are big art collectors. They have a museum down in Miami.
So where did you meet Andy Warhol?
Actually, my ex-husband and him showed at the same galleries in Europe, Bruno Bischofberger, Hans Meyer, Daniel Templon. So the dealers arranged a trade.
A trade of what?
Paintings. Like my ex-husband's painting for Andy's paintings. My ex-husband's painting actually is really cool because it's done with diamond dust. Mine is just the classical, white background, red lips, black hair.
Right. So is that an original painting you have, or did you get a copy of it?
No, that's the original.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's quite striking.
Yes, it's
the first thing you see when you walk in your place.
It's very cool because I got it reframed when I moved out here, and it had been living in New York for 40 years. And so when they took off the old frame, the dust somehow got, some of the ink, I guess, adhered to the back of the glass. So I call it my ghost image because it's actually, you can see. Did I show you that? Oh, you couldn't see it at night.
It's in your room.
Need to. Yes,
and we couldn't see it because it was at night.
Yeah, so I probably the only one in the world that has a ghost image of the Warhol, from the kind of ink that adhered to the glass, and it's hanging over my bed. And the other interesting thing about that is that Andy came up from Carnegie Mellon with Philip Pearlstein and Dorothy Pearlstein, and Philip is still with us. He's 98, working, standing up live for models every day. So Philip is a dear friend of mine, as was his wife who passed away, Dorothy, another artist. And the three of them were friends. You can look them up, Philip and Andy, and you'll see these great photographs of them in college. And so I'm the only one, I think, that has my portrait by both Andy and Philip because they're so different. Like Philip is a realist and very, and Andy, it's all artifice. And I have like about an inch of pancake makeup on me, And so I had more lines at birth than I do in that painting, actually.
So they put that on you for the painting to model?
Yeah. They try to flat. Well, yeah, he wants it really flat, the way that you. So I have no lines. I have. He was very specific about, how I had to, it was very hot in the summer and I had to take the straps down of my tank top, so he just was very specific about how he wanted me to look. Wouldn't let me smile.
No smiles. Now, is that painting, I know he did a series of women. Is that part of that or is it?
No, I mean, he also did, he did a lot of, actually at the Warhol Museum, I asked the director, what do you do if you don't know the name of the woman? Because he did a lot of people that weren't celebrities, just like that was his kind of how he made money, doing these rich people. And so he just said, Untitled Woman. So I guess that would be the name of mine. I know I'm in the catalog resume, but I haven't seen it.
Well, you're untitled, huh?
Yeah, I'm untitled, total.
Well, maybe you could go to England and get a title from somebody.
Exactly. Or not. Well, they call me Queen Helene now that the Queen died, so.
Oh, really?
I'm her replacement.
Okay, that sounds good. What else did you do in New York?
What didn't I do in New York? It was crazy days. Those were the really fun days when, like, Madonna was singing live at the Mud Club. And, of course, Patti Smith was around. And it was just like, I didn't know any different, but it was just the people you would meet and the places you would go. And I would have these parties because I lived in this big 4,000 square foot loft in Mercer Street in Soho. And there would be people that would crash the parties because there were so many people. And one of them used to crash my parties and do all the dishes afterwards. It was wonderful.
So you let that person in. They're okay.
Oh,
if
sure.
They'll clean up.
It was crazy times. Like I was working at the time as a shoe designer, and I would come home on the subway, which was then, Soho was a scary place. It was still, a lot of factories, and the whole place smelled like rice and beans. And one time I'm coming back from the double R, they called it the double R at the time, the train, walking a block to my house on the cobblestones. And out of a window is a man gets thrown out and like bounces on the cobblestone and dies in front of me. It was like,
what?
Really, it was like the Wild West. And we had, if you looked up in the sky, like the cable lines, like the wires, like going from building to building across the street. I mean, it was insane. It was so insane, but so much fun. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore like that kind of, it was like kind of before AIDS, just a really, really creative time for everybody, Fiorucci. I mean, just, it was fun. It was so much fun.
If you're involved in all this creative stuff, obviously you know a lot of gay men. Right?
Yes. Oh my God.
So how did AIDS
my
affect
best
you?
friends. Well, hugely. I mean, I was going to funerals like as I'm sure you were, like every week.
I wasn't gay at that point. I was straight.
Oh, right. But you didn't have friends that were?
And I was up in the Northwest at that time. There's 4 or 5 guys I knew that died.
Yeah.
But
Oh God. It was just everybody. I mean, my lawyer, my very best soulmate and friend that was an Italian artist, Luciano Bartolini. And I just never will forget because in the early 80s, I remember him saying, oh, no, it's an American disease because he was Italian, lived in
really?
Florence. Yeah. And I was the only woman that was allowed to go into the gay club Tabasco in Florence as an honorary member, even into the dark room.
What?
So I always say I'm a gay man in a woman's body because all my friends have always been gay. And I just, yeah.
So talk a little more about the AIDS thing, though. How did that affect you?
Well, it's just I had so many great friends that died. And, New York, it's like, creativity and gay go together, and in the art world, especially, it was just, it was devastating. It was a huge, not only AIDS, but I also have to say, as a woman, I've had many, many friends in their 40s and 50s die of breast cancer. So the combination of women dying of breast cancer and AIDS has really affected my life a lot. I mean, I've had 3 best friends that have died. I mean, best friends. Like
Wow.
yeah.
Ugh. All right. Well, moving on to a different
Okay.
topic.
Yeah. No, that's pretty
sad.
That's when the fun stopped.
Right. So you design shoes.
Yes.
How'd you get into that?
So I moved from Minneapolis. I was working in public television. And so I was looking for a TV job. And my first friend in New York, I knew was dating a guy from Minneapolis. And so we're out at dinner one night at a Greek restaurant, and I'm crying because I can't get a job. And I move in with my husband-to-be, and he's already doing really great, in the art world. And I felt like I wasn't doing anything. I mean, when I was 24 years old. And so anyway, I was crying and saying, I can't get a job. And she said, she was working at Footwear News at the time, which is the trade publication. And she said, be a shoe designer. There's no American shoe designers. So I said, okay. And so the next day I enrolled in Parsons in shoe design and shoe pattern making. And I realized very quickly why there wasn't any American shoe designers, because they're not made here. So, and in those days, it was before, computers and everything. So it was telexes and everything. So I would travel like 8 months a year to such glamorous places like Taichung and, and eat like literally dogs in China. Like you'd pick out your dog. The factory owners that was their gift to you, really, to show that you were respected. I mean, it was so crazy. We were designing shoes like in what's now called Croatia, but it was then Yugoslavia, like during war. Like, I mean, it was crazy. I made shoes in a lot of countries around the world, including Portugal and Greece and Russia a little bit, and China, of course, and oh my God, Taiwan and Italy, of course, France, Morocco, a lot of countries.
So what was your favorite country that you were dealing with shoes, the making of creating?
Well, Italy, because of course they would come, the farmers, with little truffles that they would find and put it right there on your pasta. And it was like, I mean, the food was so amazing there.
Wow.
I mean, Taiwan was horrible because the food was so awful in those days. And now I hear people go there on vacation. I can't even fathom because, like, seriously, when I went there, you would look at this river and it would be dead dogs going down like a bunch of, it was so polluted. You'd have to wear masks from all the factories. It was gross. Yeah.
And you wrote books.
Well, what happened is that I'm really just a completely frustrated shoe designer because, they don't really nurture you in America. They didn't at the time. It was all like you're supposed to knock off the European designers. So you would go to Europe with these shoe dogs, as we call them. And, it was just awful because I'm a very original designer and I wasn't like supported in that at all. And my mentor was a woman named Beth Levine, who's actually Christian Louboutin and Manolo Blahnik steal her ideas. She's the greatest shoe designer of all times, but you didn't know she was a woman because, again, her husband's name, who ran the factory, Herbert Levine, was on the label.
Seriously?
So what I do is write books about mid-century women shoe designers who you don't know because men's names were on the label. So I wrote another book about Arsho Baghsarian, who's still alive, lives on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And, she designed shoes for Christian Dior and Stewart Whites. But I mean, it's all women, but nobody knows that. It's like a secret story.
How were you able to research all that?
Well, as I said, Beth Levine was like my mentor, so I knew her. So, I would, the Metropolitan Museum has, 100 plus pair of her shoes. I started collecting. I have 220 pair. I started doing museum shows, which toured around the world. And so I've done the most amount of research on Beth Levine, which is how I wrote the book. And, she did shoes she actually won a bunch of Coty Awards. She invented boots for haute couture. And she did boots and I have the patterns she did Nancy Sinatra's white boots and Cher's over-the-knee boots, and she did, I have I should show you sometime. You would love it. It's when she won the Coty Award. They did a film with, what was her name? Peggy Moffitt, who modeled for Rudy Gernreich. And it's just an incredible piece of 1967 filmmaking.
So somewhere in all this busyness, you got married and you have a son, correct?
Oh, yeah. I did the writing thing later in life.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got married in the late 70s. So actually that's how the Andy Warhol connection, because he traded with my ex-husband. And then we had Ryder in 1986. And Ryder is named for a great American artist, Albert Pinkham Ryder, because there's a tradition in New England to name sons of artists after artists. So Tintoretto Peale, et cetera, et cetera. So my son's name is Ryder Rips. He is also an artist.
What kind of art does he do?
He does digital art, and he's kind of well known for that. And he does a lot of different kinds of art. It's always somewhat controversial. He's working on a project now that he's been working on for a while to uncover kind of the alt-right Nazi underbelly of the internet. So he's been working on that. And there's so many great stories about Ryder, because instead of reading books when he was little, we would look at pictures and I would take him to art museums. And so we spent a summer in Cortona, where my brother had a house at the time in Italy, and they don't air condition their churches. They didn't then. And so Ryder was 10 at the time, and he's wearing overalls and he has a bandana in his pocket. And we're looking at that incredible Fra Angelico painting of the Annunciation. And Ryder is 10, and he takes out the bandana from his pocket and wipes his brow, and he says, "Great art always makes me sweat."
At 10 years old.
At 10 years old. So, yeah, he's always been very quotable and funny.
Wow. And you're going to have lunch with him today, you said.
Yes, he lives in Acton, California now, and so he's in Palm Springs. His friend Petra Courtwright had an opening last night at the museum, which I heartily, hope that all of you will go see it. It's really a fantastic show.
I'll have to put that on my schedule. What kind of art is that?
It's digital.
Is
again.
it?
Yeah.
So does your son do NFTs, or is it?
He did. He's kind of, as you know, the whole crypto world and NFT world has collapsed completely. And he says, it's bullshit, the whole thing anyway. He kind of.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I shouldn't try to go that direction with my photography.
No, I don't think so.
Good pointer. Okay. So what brought you to Palm Springs?
So my son was living in LA, and this is really funny. I'd come out for Thanksgiving in 2019, the end of 2019, and we went to visit his friend who's a collector who lives in Palm Springs, Jim Budman. And he said to us, "What are you guys doing this weekend?" And we had no plans, so he handed us the key to go to Palm Springs to his house. And when I got there, it was so bizarre because I had always had, those Kleenex boxes that they sell at PSP of the modernist houses. Well, I always had one. I don't know why. I think someone gave it to me once. And in New York, it was my Kleenex box where we were staying, which was so bizarre.
So the house matched your Kleenex box.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So then...
It's a sign.
It was a sign. And then the only place I had ever heard of was the Royal Hawaiian, because in 1961, Donald Wexler had a bunch of work here, but they wouldn't sell to Jews. And so he wanted to move his mother and her friends here. So he built the Royal Hawaiian for Jews 55 and older, for his mother and her friends. So it's the only place I'd ever heard of. So I said to somebody, is there anything available? This is during the Thanksgiving, at the Royal Hawaiian. And they said, I don't know, go look and see. And there was a sign, and I walked in with a real estate agent with my son, and we bought it within 10 minutes on WhatsApp because the guys that owned it live in Holland. So
wow.
It was probably the fastest real estate transaction ever.
And you got a great condo.
Thank you.
Because I visited there.
Well, thank you so much.
It's pretty spectacular.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you scored on that one.
Yeah.
Well, you're in here, we're doing the interview, and you were in New York, and you knew Andy Warhol and all. So you got to give me a good Andy story of some sort before we move on here.
Okay, there's plenty, but my favorite one is I don't know if it's still there, but there was a restaurant on 44th Street called Un Deux Trois, 1, 2, 3, and they had paper tablecloths on the table with crayons. And anyway, so you would draw on the table and everything like that. And
oh my
anyway,
God.
so
I know where you're going with this. Oh my God.
No, you don't.
Not a valuable
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
I won't interrupt.
Not like that.
All right.
It's
all right.
much better. So we were with, I was with Andy, and his agent was Fred Hughes, who took care of all his business.
Right.
And who was hysterical. And Tony Shifrazi, the dealer. And anyway, we were all at Un Deux Trois and drawing on the tablecloth and getting drunk and everything. And Fred, who was extremely drunk, took out of his pants his penis and put it on the table. And the waiter says, who was French, "Monsieur, please put your cock away." So that was very memorable.
I guess so.
Andy was very shy about everything. He would always sit in the corner.
Boy, if you all doodled on the tablecloth, I still wish I had that tablecloth.
I wish I did too, yeah. Well, I told you that other story about Andy is that when I went to, in 1980 or something, I went to an auction at Sotheby's in the afternoon, and I had $200 to spend. And I wanted this Joseph Beuys suit. And of course, it went for $300, which, now is worth like $20 million or something. It cost me more to frame my poster of the suit than it did to buy it. But anyway, I ended up with 4 Warhol watercolors of shoes because I was a shoe designer. And he used to paint shoes for I. Miller, the store. So anyway, I had these. I went home to my loft on Mercer Street. I put them at the window, which didn't have screens or anything. I went out, and during the time I went out, it was a huge storm, rainstorm, and they all washed away, my watercolors.
No.
Yes.
No.
That's so sad. But I have my portrait, so I can't complain.
Wow. All right. Those are 2 good ones. Thanks for sharing that. So what's on your horizon?
So
What you up to?
I'm very big procrastinator, but have been writing a book. You know how they say, well, you probably don't know how they say, but but you have children. But if you play music like Mozart or Beethoven to your baby in utero, that it makes them better at math or something. Like they always have all these.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why. But anyway, I believe that if you expose your child to visual things from the time they're born, that you can actually also teach. We're also visually illiterate, but you can. I'm trying hard to put it into words, but basically, you can teach people how to see. And the name of the book is How, and then the number 2, and then the letter C. And it's really about exercises that you can do to make you more aware of your surroundings and to be able, knowledge is power. The more you know, like about, for example, art history, the more you're going to be able to appreciate the art of today because there is always precedent in things, you know?
So is the book for adults or
Yes.
adults teaching their children or what?
Yeah, both. Yeah. And for themselves. I mean,
And when are you going to finish that? How far into it are you?
I'm a couple chapters in. It's becoming, you know, have you ever written a book?
No, but I've thought of it.
Yeah. So, well,
I think everybody has a book.
well, totally.
Yeah.
But it kind of evolves into something different than what you first thought it would be. And that's what mine is kind of evolving into. It's kind of also becoming which is interesting, a visual portfolio of my work, of my life. Because, you know, I've been a designer of so many. Once you start designing shoes, which takes 200 steps.
Oh, really?
Designing anything else is a joke. So I had a wallpaper business where I did hand-printed wallpaper. I designed tiles, designed interiors. I mean, if you looked at my portfolio, I should have brought it here because that
I'd love to
helps
see it.
me. Yeah, because everything else is so easy to design. After shoes, you know, like even I do handbags, which is so easy because the size doesn't have to fit the foot, you know. And if you make a mistake with a shoe and the sizing, you know, you can't just make one shoe, you know, you have to make pre-packs, and it's just a very expensive proposition.
What is pre-pack? Is that different
Like
sizes?
you just, yeah. So you can't just, you know, make a prototype and go to, you know, Barney's and try to sell it, you know.
So you have to do one for each size, literally?
Well, you have to, there are minimums.
Okay.
From factories. It's a very expensive proposition, which is why you don't see single individuals starting a shoe company.
I guess. Wow. Well, good luck on the book.
Yeah, but I'm, you know, as you kind of got the feeling, I'm very busy, like just doing everything in Palm Springs. For me, it's such an active cultural place, and I'm very hooked into the art world here. So yeah, I'm busy. Busy as I retired after FIT, where I was working, the Fashion Institute of Technology. When they said come back, I'd already moved here, and I just thought, I'm never going back to New York. I love it here. I'm in heaven.
Do you miss New York?
Not at all.
Nothing?
No.
Really?
It's so funny because everyone said you're the quintessential New Yorker. You're never going to be able to live in a place like Palm Springs. And I just can't believe I didn't find it earlier. And the other thing is going to take the rest of my life to thaw out because I've always been in Minneapolis and Chicago and, you know, New York. I'm cold.
Right. Well, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so I get it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, my dear, any final thoughts for my listeners? Any things you've learned in your life that you'd like to share?
As my mother always said, be kind to everybody and do good. And I would tell one other story. Did I tell you the Mother's Day story of when I moved here?
No.
Oh, the way I got all my friends in Palm Springs is really interesting. So I moved on Mother's Day. My son Ryder got me a 1967 Corvair Corsa convertible, which was, of course, everybody would be around my car at the parking lot and say, beautiful car, and take pictures of it and everything. And one day, this woman that was so very chic walked by my car. She was parked next to me. She said, beautiful car. And I burst out crying, and I said, I moved here during COVID. I am so lonely. Will you be my friend?
Really?
And it turned out to be my best friend, Marcel Sitkowski, who ended up, unfortunately, she passed away. But she introduced me. She was a dealer in Los Angeles, and she introduced me to the whole art world here, which is why, you know, I very quickly got hooked in.
That's a pretty cool story.
So my other piece of advice is say what you need, and people are good, and they're there to help, you know? I needed a friend, and she stepped to the plate.
That's really great. Well, thank you for coming in, my dear.
Thank you, Wilkinson. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Huh?
I knew you would be fun.
And I loved your book.
Thank you.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
Well, thanks again for coming.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.